Welcome back to The Deep Dive. Today we're tackling something I think many of us find really frustrating in education and training.
That gap.
Yeah, exactly. That gap between what we try to teach and what people can actually show us they've learned afterwards. We're digging into designing, high-quality assessments.
It's such a critical piece. And assessing knowledge, it's way more complicated than just, throwing out a quiz.
Yeah.
There's a great quote from Bood back in 95.
Yeah.
It says, an assessment strategy is effective only insofar as it communicates appropriately with the student. It's not just about grading. It's communication.
Communication of the goals of the design, you mean?
Exactly. We've got to be really clear on two things. First, what do we actually want learners to know and be able to do? And second, how are the assessments we pick going to shape how they actually learn?
Right. So we're not just thinking about tests as measurement tools. We're seeing assessment itself as maybe the most powerful learning strategy we have.
That's the goal. And to make that work, you need, a solid foundation, a philosophy, and then a kind of blueprint.
And that's where today's focus comes in. Constructive alignment and Bloom's taxonomy, the 1-2 punch, as you said.
Let's start with that foundation. Constructive alignment, or CA. It sounds fancy, maybe, but it's built on two really powerful core ideas.
Okay.
The first is constructivism. This is the basic idea that learners aren't just empty buckets we pour information into. They're actively constructing meaning. They build understanding based on what they do, the activities they engage in.
Right, active learning, not passive reception. Makes sense. And the second idea
is alignment. This is the structural part.
Yeah.
It insists that everything in the curriculum, every single activity, every assignment, has to line up directly with what we call the intended learning outcomes, or ILOs.
ILOs, okay. Yeah. So if you decide up front what students should achieve,
then everything, the teaching methods, the readings, the tasks, and crucially, the final assessment must be designed specifically to get them there and show they got there.
So Biggs, who's a key figure here, right? He lays out a process.
Yeah, a clear 3-step process, mandatory really for CA. Step 1, carefully figure out those ILOs. What must students be able to demonstrate by the end?
Okay, defining the target.
Step 2, design the teaching and learning activities, the TLAs, specifically to help students practice and achieve those ILOs.
So the how of learning.
And step 3, design the assessment so that it explicitly requires students to demonstrate that they've met those exact ILOs. No surprises, no guessing.
Okay, now here's something interesting. You often hear educators complain, right? That students just study for the test, they try to guess what's going to be on it, focus on that, and maybe ignore the rest.
Exactly. That's always been seen as the problem. How do we fight that? Students focusing only on the assessment.
Yeah.
But CA does something really clever. It takes that human tendency, that student focus on the assessment, and it flips it. It makes the problem the solution.
How does it do that?
By making absolutely sure that those ILOs we defined back in step 1 are the only thing the assessment targets. If the ILOs are what's assessed and students focus on the assessment,
then they're automatically focusing their efforts on achieving the intended learning outcome.
Precisely. You harness their natural focus to drive the learning you actually intended.
Okay, hold on. I can hear people thinking, isn't that just teaching to the test? How do we make sure this drives deep learning, not just, cramming facts for that specific assessment task?
That's the crucial question, isn't it? And the answer lies in the quality of the ILOs themselves.
Meaning?
If your intended learning outcome is something basic, like the student will list 5 causes of the French Revolution, well, then yes, the assessment will likely be simple recall, rote memorization.
Right.
But if your ILO is, say, the student will be able to critically evaluate primary source documents to argue for the most significant social factor leading to the French Revolution, then the assessment has to be complex.
I see. Because the outcome itself demands higher order thinking.
Exactly. The assessment must require critical thinking, analysis, argumentation, things you can't just memorize. So the student, focusing on that assessment, is forced to engage in those deeper cognitive processes. The alignment drives depth, if the ILOs demand it.
So getting the language right for those ILOs is absolutely key. We need to be clear about what we mean by aims, objectives, and outcomes.
Definitely. Aims are usually broad, aspirational, like to foster an appreciation for poetry, very high level.
Okay. And objectives?
Objectives tend to be more teacher-focused. They describe what the teacher will do. For example, to introduce students to key concepts in microeconomics. It's about the delivery.
Right, the teacher's action.
But the real shift with CA is towards outcomes. Outcomes are student-focused. They describe what the student should be able to do and demonstrate.
So instead of introduce concepts,
the outcome might be Students will be able to apply microeconomic principles to analyze a given market scenario and predict potential price fluctuations. See the difference?
Yeah, it's active, measurable, focused on the student's capability. It's not just about the teacher talking.
Exactly. It demands a demonstrable skill analysis, prediction, not just passive listening.
Okay, so we've established the philosophy constructive alignment, ensuring our teaching and assessment all point towards clear, high-demand student outcomes. Now, how do we make sure those outcomes and the tasks we design are pitched at the right cognitive level?
That's where our conceptual blueprint comes in. Bloom's taxonomy.
The classic pyramid.
Well, the original from the 1950s, yes. Its huge contribution was establishing that thinking isn't just one thing. There's a hierarchy. Some cognitive tasks are just fundamentally simpler than others. Remembering fact is easier than creating a new theory, right?
Sure, it gave educators a shared language for talking about cognitive difficulty.
Absolutely. But the version most used today is the revised taxonomy from Anderson and Krathwohl in 2001.
Why the revision? What did they change that was so important for, say, assessment design? The old one mostly just focused on the verb, didn't it?
The revision addressed some conceptual fuzziness in the original. Mainly, it separated out the type of knowledge from the cognitive process being used. This created a much clearer two-dimensional framework.
2 dimensions. Okay, that sounds key.
It is. It forces anyone designing a task or an outcome to think about 2 things simultaneously.
Let's break those down. Dimension 1.
Dimension 1 is the cognitive process. This is the doing part. These are the verbs arranged hierarchically from simpler to more complex. Remember, understand, apply, analyze, evaluate, and create.
Okay, the familiar levels. Remember, understand, apply, analyze, evaluate, create.
Got it.
And dimension 2.
Dimension 2 is the knowledge dimension. This is the what. What kind of knowledge are we asking the student to work with?
Different types of knowledge.
It starts with factual knowledge, basic elements, terminology, specific details. Then conceptual knowledge classifications, principles, theories, models, how things relate.
Okay, facts and concepts.
Then procedural knowledge skills, techniques, methods, algorithms, how to do things.
Right, like following steps or using a tool.
And importantly, there's metacognitive knowledge. This is thinking about thinking, knowledge about cognitive tasks, awareness of your own learning processes, strategic thinking, self-reflection.
Metacognition. That feels really relevant today, especially with complex problem solving or using new tools, maybe.
Hugely relevant. Think about assessment tasks that ask you not just to solve the problem, but to reflect on the strategy you used, or to evaluate the potential biases in your own analysis. That's tapping into metacognitive knowledge.
So the power is in combining these. It's not just analyze, it's
analyze, cognitive process, the conceptual knowledge dimension of, say, different leadership styles, or apply cognitive process, the procedural knowledge dimension of a specific coding technique.
Got it. That dual focus, the doing, and what allows for much more precise calibration of the task's difficulty and nature.
Exactly. It moves us beyond just picking a verb.
Okay, this is super practical. Let's walk through how this 2-dimensional thinking translates into actual assessment questions or tasks. We can use those cognitive process levels as our guide.
Sounds good. Let's start at the base. Remembering. This is about retrieving information, often factual knowledge. The question stems are pretty direct, aren't they?
Yeah, things like, what is the definition of? Name the parts of. Where did? Simple recall.
Efficient for checking basic knowledge, terminology.
Moving up to understanding. Here the focus shifts to making sense of information, maybe explaining conceptual knowledge.
Right, so the stems change. We ask things like, explain why. Summarize the main idea of, can you describe in your own words? It's about interpretation, comparison, explaining, going beyond just repeating.
Okay, makes sense. Then we hit applying. This feels like where procedural knowledge often comes in, using knowledge in a concrete situation.
Often, yes. It's about implementing or executing a procedure. So stems might be, how would you use this theory to solve? Demonstrate how to. Calculate the result using method X.
You mentioned a modern example earlier.
Yeah, a really relevant one from the source materials was generate multiple prompts from an assessment question and compile an answer from outputs. That tests the procedure of using a tool, like an AI, effectively.
Interesting. Okay, now we're getting into the higher order stuff. Analyzing, breaking things down.
Exactly. Differentiating, organizing, attributing, finding connections and structures, often used with conceptual or even factual knowledge to find patterns.
So the questions sound like, what are the key differences between A and B? How is this structured? What's the relationship between...
Or that comparative example. Compare what the technology produced to what you produced yourself. That forces an analysis of both the output and the process. It's meta-analytical in a way.
Right. Very cool. Now, the top two levels, evaluating. This is about making judgments.
Yes, based on criteria or standards.
Yep.
Checking, critiquing. So schemes like judge the effectiveness of, what are the strengths and weaknesses of, would you recommend this approach, why or why not?
And this is where those ethical considerations often fit in, right?
Yeah.
Especially with new tech.
Absolutely. Evaluating the implications, maybe the ethical implications related to privacy, bias, environmental impact, human rights of implementing a certain system or procedure. It demands justification based on clear criteria.
Okay, and finally, the peak, creating. This is about putting elements together to form something new.
Generating, planning, producing. Reorganizing parts into a novel pattern or structure. This demands synthesis of different knowledge types.
Yeah.
Factual, conceptual, procedural, maybe even metacognitive planning.
So the tasks are inherently generative. Design a plan to, propose a solution for, develop an original model to explain.
Exactly. You simply can't get to create through rote learning. It requires genuine understanding and the ability to synthesize and produce something new.
So we have these levels of cognitive demand tied to knowledge types. How does this inform the type of assessment task we choose, like multiple choice versus an essay?
Good question. The task type needs to match what you're trying to measure. For efficient assessment of, say, factual or conceptual knowledge across many people, objective test items work well.
Things like multiple choice, true, false, maybe short, one-word answers.
Exactly. They're quick to mark and can, surprisingly, be written to assess quite high levels on Bloom's scale. Understanding, applying, analyzing, even evaluating, though they struggle with create. They are good for checking procedural knowledge recall, too.
But for assessing things like organizing complex ideas, originality, argumentation, the ability to create, objective tests fall short.
They generally do. That's where performance assessments come in. These require more subjective judgment from the assessor.
Like essays, reports, case studies.
Yes, those are written performance assessments, restricted response like a paragraph, or extended response like a full essay. They let students organize thoughts, develop arguments, show originality.
And there are non-written types, too.
Sure. Oral presentations, debates, building a model, performing a lab experiment, creating a portfolio. These performance tasks are crucial for seeing if students can actually do something complex, integrating different skills, and expressing their understanding effectively. They really encourage deeper thinking.
Okay, let's try and pull this all together for you, the listener. We started with this core idea, this philosophy of constructive alignment.
Yeah, basically making sure what we intend for learners to achieve lines up perfectly with how we teach, and crucially, what we ask them to demonstrate in assessments.
Then we layered on the revised Bloom's taxonomy as our blueprint, that two-dimensional model.
Cognitive process, the doing, and knowledge type, the what. It lets us precisely define the kind and level of thinking we're aiming for in our ILOs and assessments.
We saw how specific question stems map to these levels, moving from simple recall right up to complex creation.
And we touched on how different assessment types, objective tests versus performance tasks, are suited for measuring different kinds of learning outcomes along that spectrum.
So the big takeaway seems to be about intentional design, using these tools to engineer assessments that don't just test memory, but actively drive the kind of deep learning we actually want.
Exactly. And if we design assessments that truly reflect that full spectrum from remembering up to other, think about what that means for how you learn outside of formal settings. You're not bound by someone else's ILOs anymore.
Right. So how can you apply this framework to your own learning?
Well, it prompts the question. When you're tackling something new in your professional or personal life, how are you structuring your own learning activities? Are you stopping at understanding the basics?
That's the challenge we want to leave you with. When you encounter complex new information, maybe a new technology at work, a really dense book, a major decision you need to make, where on that Bloom scale do you typically stop?
Are you content with just remembering the key terms and understanding the main concepts?
Or are you pushing yourself higher? Are you applying it to new situations? Are you analyzing its components, comparing it, critiquing it?
Are you evaluating its worth, its implications? Are you trying to create something new from it, a new perspective, a solution, a recommendation for change?
That intentional push up the cognitive ladder, using these kinds of questions as your own internal assessment, that really feels like the difference between just being familiar with something and truly mastering it.